Greetings, everyone. It's time for the 2014 Golden Nibiru. I'm sorry that I've not spread out the Nibiru videos throughout the year this year like I did last year. I've not had as much time, read motivation this year, to get these out. Now that it's basically my last chance, though, I pretty much have to edit this video tonight even as I'm recording this. I decided to do it. So let's look over our 3 nominees this year. First, though, for those who are new to my channel, let's do a quick refresher course on what the Golden Nibiru is. In the several years leading up to 2012, the conspiracy theorists / New Age community insisted to their followers, and indeed to the world, that some kind of earth-shattering, world-changing event of some sort would happen on December 21st of that year. That is December 21st, 2012, almost 2 years ago now. The exact details of the event that was supposed to happen on that date varied from source to source, but it was either to be a large-scale, extinction event-level disaster, or some kind of grand cosmic ascension, or some combination of the two. According to some people, both were to happen at the same time. Of course, despite the fact that the predictions entailed unmistakably cataclysmic or at least world-changing phenomenon that could not possibly be construed as anything that could ever be confused with the events of an ordinary day, nothing significantly out of the ordinary happened on December 21st, 2012. So, did the conspiracy theorist community apologize for being wrong in front of a lot of people for several years? Of fucking course they didn't. What do you think, they're honest or something? No, they spent maybe a month rationalizing how the grand cosmic enlightenment half of what they had talked about did happen, or at least started, without leaving any visible sign of the noticeable shift they'd spent years clearly talking about. And when they were done with that, they, for the most part, just gradually let their failure fade from public memory. It's hardly ever mentioned these days. I, however, refuse to fucking forget. And so, with inspiration from Potholer54's Golden Crocoduck, and with his permission, every year on December 21st, I hold an award ceremony to honor the most ridiculous statement made by a conspiracy theorist or New Ager. This is the Golden Nibiru 2014. So, with all of that said, let's start with spirit science. As well as Teal Scott, the girl next to him in the following clip, though since the claim came from his lips, he's the one being nominated, and if he wins, only he and not her will be ineligible in future years, the video will focus on him, etc.
And it's really interesting because you look at what we're blasting ourselves with in the media, with Hollywood, you know, after, like, I think I did a video about this before, but there used to be all sorts of media all about terrorists. There's these war criminals and terrorists and this and that, and then, you know, 9/11 happened, and Hollywood kind of primed the pump for this to happen and manifest in real life. And then now, what do we see everywhere? Alien attacks. We see zombie apocalypses. We see giant monsters coming out of the earth and destroying things. And I'm not saying that it's gonna look exactly like that, but we have to be aware that what we create and what we put our attention on is gonna manifest.
And even quicker, because the buffer time is disappearing.
And even quicker, yeah. So, I mean, I don't want to be like a fearmonger, but there has been a number of reports of basically living zombies that have already started to happen. It's just something to be aware of.
You know, I'd forgotten how difficult this could be. So then, let's look thoroughly at Spirit Science's alleged citations, the articles he flashed on the screen. First off, he cited a BuzzFeed article. This thing lists several stories supposed to involve zombie attacks in Miami around the same time. So then, let's define what a zombie attack is, and then examine each of these stories to see if that's what happened there. Because Spirit Science specifically said that zombies, having previously been fictional, are becoming real because of our minds, I think it's perfectly reasonable to demand that the specific traits commonly attributed to zombies be represented here. Given that, in order to count as a zombie attack, I propose that an incident must occur where a person who is not provably still alive and does not display intelligence deliberately cannibalizes or attempts to cannibalize another human. Additionally, all persons bitten must later be turned into zombies themselves, and the person biting must never recover from their zombatic state because the cure for the zombie plague does not currently exist in the real world. Remember, that is the popular image of zombies, and since spirit science asserts that these things are being created by our minds, our creations should match what we imagine them to be like. Starting with a BuzzFeed article. Story number 1. A group of children at a school developed unexplained rashes and were then quarantined. No cannibalism took place or was attempted. We may not know what caused this rash, but that does not make it a zombie attack. Story 2. An unknown chemical, possibly from an aerosol can that exploded from someone's luggage, but also possibly not, it wasn't clear according to the story, which is all I'm going by, was released into an airport and gave 5 people respiratory problems for which they went to the hospital. People were later allowed back into the same airport. No cannibalism took place or was attempted by anyone in the story, and nothing in the incident suggests zombies in so much as the vaguest way. Story 3. The link from the BuzzFeed article to this one gives me a 404 error, but the description of the story in the BuzzFeed article itself says that it's just about more rashes in a high school near the first. A contagious rash, and I'll go ahead and grant that that's what this is not automatically a zombie virus. And if there was something about cannibalism in the story, why doesn't the BuzzFeed article quote it? Story number 4. A Canadian man landing in Miami who, because he was coming from Canada to Miami and had just landed, could not have gotten the disease, supposed to be from Florida, and no, this isn't patient 0 because it happened later than the others so far, was disoriented after a flight and rushed towards the front of the plane when it landed, ignoring orders from crew members to sit down. He was subdued by 165 other passengers. This one is the first one involving human activity, but no aggressive action was taken directly towards another human by the supposed zombie, and no cannibalism was attempted or performed. This is not a zombie attack. Story 5. After a pesticide was used on a school bus by the bus driver, people on the bus got watery eyes and generally didn't feel too well. Nothing related to cannibalism occurred or was attempted by anyone. Not a zombie. Story 6. An anesthesiologist was driving nice and drunk down the road, something a zombie cannot do because they cannot operate machinery because that requires higher brain function, and because poisons do not affect them and therefore they cannot get drunk, when he was pulled over. He allegedly verbally resisted arrest, something a zombie cannot do because they cannot talk, and shouted at police for stealing money, something a zombie would probably not know and almost certainly not care about. In the back of the police car, the alleged zombie banged his head against the wire cage thingy in front of him, and later split the blood onto an officer when they let him out for fear he'd hurt himself. If he had planned to spit blood on the officer to transmit a disease, he would be displaying a level of cognition which zombies are not normally depicted as capable of. He also had an unidentified liquid, unidentified pills, and large quantities of cash in his car, potentially consistent with drug offenses which a zombie wouldn't commit. No cannibalism was attempted or committed by anyone. Story 7. This one's a little more promising. A naked man was caught by police chewing off an unconscious victim's face and eating it. When the police arrived on the scene, the man's face was already half eaten. The police fired at the face-eating man, but he didn't stop eating after being shot. Witnesses said they heard at least 6 shots, and by the end of it, the man was dead. Sounds a little more promising, eh? Well, it's the best one so far, no doubt, but I have one question. Why was he naked? You can come up with any number of reasons, but let me offer you one straight from the news article. Quote, police theorize the attacker might have been suffering from cocaine psychosis, a drug-induced craze that bakes the body internally and often leads the affected to strip naked to try and cool off. The cocaine hypothesis passes Occam's razor for 2 reasons. First, it does not require the additional assumptions that zombies exist and that this man was one. Second, it does not require the additional assumption that something extra happened to arrange that the man was unclothed when he would have presumably been clothed by default. Humans usually are. It explains the most with the least and is thus to be preferred. Story 8. This is the other story he showed besides the BuzzFeed article, and another real case of cannibalism. A man stormed into his friend's house, a loved one who a zombie without memories would not target, though occasionally zombies do have memories, so that could be up in the air, and bit off a man's arm when he tried to restrain him. After stripping naked, which a zombie would not do because they do not care about their clothes, because they do not have higher cognition, and do not therefore strip naked under any circumstances. He also talked during the incident, which a zombie would not do because they could not do. The bottom of the article mentions another instance of cannibalism involving a knife, also known as a tool, something zombies are generally not intelligent enough to use. Yes, these stories did all occur around the same time and around the same area, but there is no other reason to believe the incidents of cannibalism are connected, and absolutely nothing pointing to zombies in particular as their cause. Indeed, in every case, there's at least one significant fact which seems to contradict the traditional depictions of zombies. Well, that took a while. Let's go for something easier. Let's see who's up next.
1981, Portland, Oregon. A mysterious arcade cabinet appears in the corner of a local arcade. The game becomes popular and fights break out over who will play next. Unidentified men visit the machine, collect data, and leave without speaking to anyone. Players begin to have terrifying nightmares, insomnia, and memory loss. Some even commit suicide. The game vanishes months later and is never seen again.
The story of Polybius is perhaps the biggest unsolved mystery in gaming. An evil arcade cabinet that drove its players crazy, being used by shadowy men to brainwash unsuspecting gamers using bright colors and subliminal messages. It seems far-fetched. I warn you, dear theorists, that my findings may be the single most disturbing revelation that this show has ever...
Aww, game theory? I like you. Look, dude, I'm sorry, but you just promoted a conspiracy theory, and a wrong one, and I have to hold you accountable. Or at least hold someone accountable. You reach a lot of people, and even though this video is a few years old, you still reached quite a few people even back then. Look, I get how you made this mistake. You specialize in talking about possibilities, and you point out a lot of reasons that Polybius might have happened. But you forget the reasons that we pretty much know it didn't. The first step in figuring out if this thing actually existed and the events allegedly surrounding it actually happened is to try to figure out if there's any documentation from around the time suggesting that an ounce of it did. Fortunately, we do have a tool on our side. Google allows us to do time-limited searches to look for pages posted only within a certain date range. By putting our start date on January 1st, 1900, we ensure that there's no chance whatsoever of the problem being that the first mention is before our selected range. No one thinks that Polybius existed back then, so its first mention is obviously going to be later. So, ignoring cases where the page was posted before the legend existed and a comment was left on it later, what is the chronologically earliest result of Polybius game on the web that has anything to do with what we're talking about? Well, first let's set the range from 1900 to 1990. Do we find anything? Nope, no results from 1900 to 1990, at least that have to do with this. Keep in mind that all of this is supposed to have happened in 1981, so no one talked about it for 9 years in modern society where everyone is literate and people write about things all the damn time. What about 1900 to 2000? Well, we do get some results for that search. One of them was a Snopes page, which while posted during that time range was last edited in 2007, hence the mention could easily have been added later. And in any case, Snopes almost certainly didn't mention it first. They would have addressed it after someone else already did, so this isn't going to be the first mention. The second one is a web page including a video where people read a letter that is dated to 2014. It's primarily a video Q&A thing. There's a transcript below it which mentions the date in 1998, which Google assigns it. I think that mention of the date in 1998 is tricking Google into thinking the page is older than it is, but Either way, it provably isn't that old. Why would there be a letter there dated to 2014? I mean, it's not framed as a fictional story taking place in the future. It's supposed to be a letter that they just received for a Q&A video, so there's no reason that the date would be wrong. By the way, that date that's mentioned is in August of 1998, and the post claims that that's when Polybius was first spoken of in a forum post. If that's the case, which it might not be because I wasn't able to find this post, but if that is the case, that means that the first mention of Polybius was in August of 1998, in other words, 17 years after the incident was supposed to have occurred. That's a bit odd, don't you think? When we move up to 2002, there's nothing new. Keep in mind I'm using January 1st of each year. Because I've actually done this before, I'm starting to search in smaller increments, so I moved to June 1st, 2002. There are no results except a forum post from a thread created earlier than that date, where the post itself is dated by the site as having been made in 2003. So someone made a web page, and then someone else added a mention of Polybius to it later. September 1st is the same way, then October, then November, etc. Skipping ahead, as you yourself can find out if you do this month by month, the first mention of Polybius is a page on Good Deal Games posted on March 1st, 2003. Barring forum posts from later, the updated Snopes page, and the anomalous Q&A, this is the first mention of Polybius anywhere, as far as I can tell. Well then, let's ask two questions. The first is this. Why, if Polybius is real, did reports surrounding it not emerge sooner, like, around the early 80s when it's supposed to have happened? People who believe in Polybius will, it seems to me, have to assert one of two things. Either Polybius was not newsworthy enough to make it onto the internet in 1981, which is ridiculous because of how over-the-top this shit that was supposed to have happened surrounding it is, but whatever, or it was covered up. Both of those possibilities, however, bring a still more damning question. My dear Polybius believer, if Polybius was so well covered up, or so uninteresting, that not a single report of it showed up from when it happened to 2003, 22 years later, long enough that a child born when the incident occurred would be a senior in college when reports first got out, how did accurate information suddenly become available like that, despite not being traceable to a specific newly leaked government document or newspaper report? The only plausible way that information that had been successfully covered up for that long would suddenly become available would be if a government document was newly leaked. But the Good Deal Games article does not mention anything like that anywhere, and as far as I'm aware, no one else has either. The page contains no citations. It frames Polybius as a legend that pre-existed it, even though there's little evidence that it did. MatPat, I'm sorry, but you need to do better than regurgitating crap like this without checking it like I was able to. However, piggybacking on what I said earlier about having to hold someone accountable, I shall have mercy on you. After all, why nominate MatPat when it would be better to nominate the person who actually made Polybius up, since I'm not going to go and cover Polybius again next year? The article in question, the Good Deal Games one, which apparently made up the Polybius rumor, is credited to a Michael Thompson, so I'm making him the second nominee for the 2014 Golden Nibiru. Alright, so who's our third and last nominee this year?
Well, here we are on the last day of the month, and I've only just become aware that it's Islamophobia Awareness Month. How terribly unaware of me. Still, better late than never. I think it's important to be aware of Islamophobia, don't you? Not the concept, obviously, because that doesn't exist, but the word, which does exist and has been growing like a tumour on the language for some years now. Happily, the last 2 decades of relentless Muslim grievance-mongering and knee-jerk offence have made many of us keenly aware of the word Islamophobia as a cynical weapon of cultural terrorism and an outrageous attempt to portray common sense as a mental illness.
Really? Alright, fine. I'll explain this. The term Islamophobia, as anyone living in an English-speaking country ought to be able to deduce, is not meant to assert that people who hate Muslims or Islam have a literal mental illness. Phobia has become the de facto suffix for bigotry in addition to fear, which is why it's also used to describe transphobia, homophobia, and biphobia. Homophobes make essentially the same argument, by the way, that people calling them homophobes are asserting that they're afraid of homosexuals in a literal sense, when that's not what people mean. Pat, stop quibbling over semantics and please address the actual problem with what you believe in and with what you preach. As for anti-Muslim bigotry not being real, if you did mean that, the FBI disagrees. According to them, 11.6% of anti-religious hate crimes in America in 2012 were against Muslims. The fact that that number is not 0% proves that at least someone is bigoted against Muslims for being Muslims. If you want to dispute that statistic, I'm sorry, I'm going to trust them over you or anyone you're likely to quote. As for the rest of Pat Condell's video, what I want you to do is go watch the video and mentally replace every mention of Islam with homosexuality. So then, with that settled, here's a recap of today's nominees. Spirit Science, for claiming that the power of the human mind is making zombies come into existence and inciting things that either had nothing to do with zombies, were demonstrably not zombies, or were better explained by things other than zombies. Michael Thompson, for either making up the Polybius legend, or perhaps uncritically accepting a forum post from 1998 and regurgitating it without referencing it in any specific way. Pat Condell, for asserting that the use of the word Islamophobia is an implicit assertion that anti-Muslim bigotry is a mental illness, while himself making the implicit assertion that such bigotry does not exist, when the FBI can tell you it does, and anyone living in an English-speaking country can tell you it isn't. So those are our nominees, but how do we select the winner? Well, for those of you who weren't around for the last Golden Nibiru competition, you guys get to vote. To vote, please leave a comment stating the names of either one or two of the nominees. Yes, you heard correctly. You are allowed to vote for two. This is an attempt to reduce the spoiler effect and keep the result more in line with public opinion without alienating you with a complicated voting system wherein you rank your votes and the biggest loser drops and his votes go somewhere else, etc. Voting will close at 11:59 on December 9th, Central Standard Time, give or take a few minutes, and the award video will be released on December 21st, honoring the winner with additional exploration and ridicule. While voting, remember the criteria for the Golden Nibiru. The question isn't whether or not the people are lying per se, or how easy it is to prove that they're wrong, but specifically to what degree they should have been able to realize that what they said was false when they said it. With all of that said, thank you for voting, and until next time, may the golden wings fly forever. Not for what they are, but for what they represent.